To Dream with You. Written by Just Thinking Drabbles. Read by Arashi. Daisies. Their lovely scent was the first thing Byleth recognized before his consciousness fully returned to him. His eyes soon followed the command, opening slowly and adjusting to the jarring bleached sunlight that filtered through the room. Yet, upon glancing around, it became clear to him that this was not his room. It was familiar enough, though, and not for many pleasant reasons. The infirmary was not a place forgotten easily. He sighed, ignoring the effort it took to take in a deep breath, and tried to sit up. Yet the pain it caused was far too intense, and he failed instantly. Resting back against the pillow, he turned towards the window and tried to remember what had led him here. It all came in fragments. A rainy battlefield, the flash of a blade he only just barely managed to notice, the sting of the sword as it met with his skin, and the bright light of healing magic as someone repeatedly called his name. Linhardt. Remembering the green-haired mage, he quickly sat up in bed and regretted the choice instantly. A horrible ache in his rib caused him to hiss and fall back against the pillow, holding his eyes shut and gritting his teeth until it subsided. It seemed he would be here for longer than he hoped. He had never been one for resting much, but he knew it was better that he did, and that those he cared about would insist he do so until he was entirely recovered. Though, if he were going to have to stay here, he did wish that he had a bit of company to help him pass the time. Then, almost as if the very thought had materialized him, Linhardt stepped through the door. He was yawning as he entered the room, not an unusual thing for the man to do, except this particular one didn't seem to be of the simple desire to return to bed. From the bags under his eyes and the disheveled strands of hair falling from his messy bun, it looked as though he had barely gotten any sleep, if any at all. The thought that perhaps he had been the reason for his unrest pained Byleth greatly. When he finished yawning, Linhardt's eyes drifted to the bed where Byleth lay, and briefly widened at the sight of him, before soon filling with tears. You're alive," he said, the words so quiet they were almost drowned out by the sound of footsteps passing in the hallway. "Yes," Byleth replied, almost breathlessly. He wished he had something better to say, but his mind was completely void of any words that might have brought comfort. All he could think was how happy he was to see the man he loved, and how desperately he wished to hold him. Linhardt stepped towards him cautiously, as if he were a mirage that might disappear were he to make any sound. "Thank Goddess. For a while you had me worried." Byleth lowered his head and stared at his calloused fingers. "I'm sorry." A dip of the bed, the warmth of Linhardt as he leaned closer and placed his hand over his, and Byleth's eyes were drawn upwards once again. He never could keep his eyes away from the man for long. Linhardt shook his head and leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. It was gentle and full of so much relief and love. Byleth prayed it would never end. When Linhardt finally pulled away, he chased after him, and the feeling of his lips against his briefly, before their foreheads fell together. Linhardt sighed contentedly. "No need to apologize. You're okay. That's what matters." Byleth replied with only a smile, but he knew it was enough for Linhardt. "How are you feeling?" "The wound is painful, but it's nothing I cannot handle. Thank you, by the way, for saving me." Linhardt hummed and brushed a lock of Byleth's hair behind his ear. "It was nothing." He shook his head and laid his hand over his, giving it a tight squeeze. "It was everything." A blush dusted over his cheeks, and he turned his head away to try and hide it. They stayed like that for a moment, hands intertwined, as they relaxed in the peace and quiet that always came with being in one another's company. Then Linhardt turned to him, a playful smile on his face that always reminded Byleth of a cat. "Do you mind if I lay next to you? Unless it's too painful, of course. Then I can—" "Please," Byleth interrupted, as he patted the bed, and the mage chuckled at the desperation slipping into his normally level voice. "You don't have to tell me twice. But promise me you'll let me know if anything starts hurting." "I promise." He then scooted to the side of the bed to give Linhardt some room, and watched as his boyfriend laid next to him. Byleth wrapped an arm around him as he laid his head on his chest and yawned once again. "I miss this," he said, his voice already groggy with sleep. Byleth chuckled. "Napping?" "Mm-hmm," Lynn hummed sleepily. "With you. It's always better. Lying next to you." Byleth kissed the top of his head and pulled him closer to his chest as he leaned next to his ear, whispering, "Everything's better with you." Yet, if the man heard it, he wasn't sure, as he was already fast asleep. Byleth smiled happily and laid his head on top of his, allowing himself to enjoy the warmth of his love's body close to his and the soothing sound of his breathing as he rested peacefully. He wanted things to always be like this, serene and wonderful, as they allowed themselves the rest they both deserved. He knew it couldn't always, but he hoped that one day, after the war was over and they had won, the two of them could have countless days of laying in bed together and holding each other close. Such a future was one he was willing to fight for, and he would make it a reality, for all of his friends, and for Linhardt especially. He loved him, after all, more than he ever thought he could love anyone, and he would do anything to bring about a peaceful world for him to live in.